On today's episode of the CLS Experience, we have a very exclusive treat. She's a highly acclaimed writer, speaker, entrepreneur, and best-selling author of a handful of classic books with millions of copies sold, no big deal. She's one of the world's most influential observers of happiness and human nature, and her podcast has north of 220 million downloads, just to name a few. Her audience is as engaging and as loyal as it gets, and she's been interviewed by Oprah and walked arm in arm with the Dalai Lama. She's the founder of the Happiness Project, and she's making a massive impact on this world. She's just a juggernaut in all facets of life and a terrific wife and mother. Please welcome the dynamic, impactful, entertaining, and serious, the beautiful, brilliant, and multifaceted Gretchen Rubin. How you doing, Gretchen?
Good. I like your adjectives. That's correct. Keep it up.
My pleasure. You feel elevated?
Sure.
All right, cool. We're going to have so much fun today. We probably could have talked for an hour before we hit record, but I want to save the juicy stuff for the audience and so forth. I'm a fan. I've been a fan for a while. The audience, and I just want to say this. If you guys aren't familiar, go check out all of Gretchen's content, her books, her podcast, her website, her social media, all that stuff. What I think is most valuable today is we just have an unbelievable conversation. But before we dive in, we're going to get a little weird. You ready for me, Gretchen?
Yeah, bring it on.
What is your superpower?
Observing what's happening around me.
Yeah. Were you always like that, or you kind of developed that a little bit later?
I think I developed it. Yeah, I think I love to read. I've always read, and reading is a way to get insight into like how people think and behave. But then I started trying to understand, like, human nature. That's my subject, is human nature. So I spend all my time just trying to understand what's happening around me and the people around me.
Why does that interest you so much?
I don't know. That's always been my big subject. I wrote a biography of Winston Churchill and one of John F. Kennedy because they were these gigantic figures. And so you could sort of see them more easily because they were so exaggerated and there was so much information written about them. My first book was called Power, Money, Fame, Sex, a User's Guide. That was all about power, money, fame, and sex. So I just keep taking one look after another at sort of like, who are we? Why do we do what we do? How can we change if we want to change? And that's what interests me. And kind of the practical side of it, because many people are sort of philosophically interested in it. And I'm interested in sort of like, okay, given what research shows and science and philosophy, what could you do in your own life starting tomorrow?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge you for that. One thing that you do so well is a lot of people are philosophers and they make it a little bit more complicated than maybe it needs to be. You make this content so digestible and easier to comprehend, practical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. I'm kind of a Benjamin Franklin type. I'm really interested in sort of like, how do you make it concrete? How do you make transcendent ideas concrete?
Which begs the question, how are you able to pull off being both entertaining and serious at the same time?
Well, thank you for saying that, because that's exactly what I aim for. I really admire people who can manage to be, kind of both deep and light. Yeah, so it's something that I strive for sure.
But how do you do it? What's your technique?
Control of language, probably. I started out in law, so I started out as a lawyer. And I mean, I remember vowing to myself, like, I will never write like this. I will never read this kind of thing again. It's so unnecessarily just, complex. And it wasn't straightforward. It wasn't clear. It wasn't a pleasure to read. And so I go through draft after draft after draft of what I'm writing, trying to say it as clearly as I can and like with the most colorful and vivid language that I can use. That's very direct. And I think sometimes when you do that, it can kind of get funny. And it's just easier to understand. So I feel like it's just kind of through word choice, really. Yeah. That's my secret passion, word choice, changing verbs around. Can do it for hours.
I love it. And I think people who may not be so familiar with your content, but maybe on the surface of it, don't realize how funny you are and your sense of humor.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, I try to be funny. Yeah. I feel like it's just a lot easier to stay engaged in something if it's funny, or if the stories are really good. I also try to tell like really interesting stories. Though what makes a story interesting is always kind of a mystery to me. But yeah, so I do think about that. Like, how do you keep people engaged? Because you can write the most brilliant thing, but if nobody wants to read it or think about it, it doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating what you just said, like what makes an interesting story. When I first started speaking publicly, which was only a couple of years ago, I was taught that the most important things to make a successful keynote speech is stories and lessons.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm very interested in sort of lessons. I have a real didactic side to me. So my podcast is Happier with Gretchen Rubin, and once a week, it's like a regular episode that's 40 minutes. It's my sister, who's a Hollywood showrunner, and I talk about how to be happier. That's the name of the podcast. But then every Monday, I do like a 2 to 4 minute story, and it's definitely like a story with a lesson. So it's not quite Aesop's fables, but it's kind of in that zone. And it's so fun to like think about, well, how would you tell an interesting story, and then how do you sort of underscore the lesson of that story? They're really very very creative and challenging to write.
I imagine you look for a lesson in everything, even like a movie that might not be inspirational. Am I right?
100%. No, I constantly will cite, like I went through this whole Beatles kick. Like I watched, a bunch of Beatles documentaries, and I kept writing about the Beatles. And yeah, a lot of times it'll just be some, or like I went to a dinner party and somebody said something. And I read a lot. So a lot of times I'll comment on something that I read. So yeah, I'm always looking for, those good stories in everyday life.
Me too. I'm always looking for, I always say to my brother's my best friend in the world, there's a message in everything, because I'm always able to extract something. If you look for it, there's always something there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, another thing I'm doing, I'm writing a book of aphorisms, which are, sort of like concise statements of sort of some deep insight. And I'm collecting proverbs of the professions. So maybe if you think of any proverbs of the financial profession or any profession, let me know, because I'm collecting this, because I do think people get a kick out of like some kind of folk wisdom that's, don't outkick your coverage. Well, that applies in a lot of places, or when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. That works in a lot of in a lot of areas. So yeah, so I'm always looking for those lessons as well.
I love this. Only negative I got going on is we don't have 10 hours to chat, but I have a feeling it's just the beginning of the friendship. I saw you say this somewhere, and I'm curious if it's definitely true, because it's relatable to me. Is it true you can't, or you have trouble meditating?
Yeah, I do not find it to be a useful tool. I've tried it twice. Dan Harris, who's like 10% happier, he's a friend, and he really encouraged me the second time, and got me all fired up. And I did it, for months, and it just is not a tool that works for me. And I find that when you ask around, it is a tool that not everybody benefits from. And I think sometimes, I don't know how you feel about meditation, but I think sometimes people feel really sheepish about it. Or the meditators say to us, well, if you just meditated more, then it would kick in. Like the fact that it doesn't work means that you need to like just do it more. And I get that for some people it's incredibly valuable, but I think that nothing works for everybody.
It's true.
To-do lists don't work for everybody. Getting up early and doing something first thing doesn't work for everybody, and meditation doesn't work for everybody. How about you? Are you a meditator?
I find it challenging to like quiet the noise, because my mind is always moving. I'm aware, like I like to control my thoughts, in the sense that thoughts are random, thinking is not. So if I have a negative thought, I become aware, try to replace it with something more positive. But if I just sit down and try to meditate, I was never able to, or I could probably try harder if I'm being honest, but I was never able to really get in a rhythm where I could say I meditate and it's a success for me. So I'm more like you with this.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ways to achieve our aims, I think.
100%. Yeah. I know you're big on creativity, and you're one of the most creative people that I know. I'm just curious, like, is someone born creative, or can they become creative?
Ooh, what a great question. I don't know. That is a great question. I mean, certainly but when I look back on my own life, like I started reading late, but from the minute that I could read, all I wanted to do was read. It was like the kind of thing where my parents said to be like, okay, you have to like go outside and play, because I would just read, and it's my treehouse and my cubicle. And so for me, my what I create comes out of what I consume. But maybe you can derail someone's creativity, but I don't know if you can stoke someone's creativity. I don't know.
It's so true. And like, we're hiring now and we're scaling and we're growing, which is great. And it's so exciting. And one of the things that I look for, I never really publicly said this, but like, I'm looking for creativity. Like, I don't want you to think that you don't have a voice here. Like, I want you to bring ideas to the table, stuff that I didn't see coming. And I think, pretty early on, like if somebody has the capacity to bring you that stuff,
Yes.
or if they're kind of just like more like, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Well, and it's interesting because you pointed out an aspect of creativity, which I think doesn't get enough attention, which is how open are you to someone else's idea? Because I think sometimes people are very creative, want to control every aspect of it. Like they really want to like steer the ship. And that can be very successful. But I think being able to hear other people's ideas and understand how to make things better or how to make things bigger or to have a different approach, that's a different kind of skill, and it does affect creativity as well. Like, as I said, my sister's a TV showrunner. That's a very collaborative form of creativity. I don't know that I could be that collaborative, but like definitely like you working with a team, if somebody comes to you and says like, hey, what about this interesting new take on doing Instagram live, are you going to kind of say, no, because I got my way of doing it, or can you hear somebody's creativity and boost your creativity through their input?
Are you asking me personally?
No, I'm just like, yeah, can one
Yeah.
do that? I
So
think is if you can, because I think some people can't, some people pride themselves on not doing it.
you know what? We got our brand to a pretty impressive place, but I also realized like what got us here isn't what's going to get us there. And one thing that it's been challenging, but I'm getting better at is delegating, because my thought process,
Yeah.
when I was building Gretchen, my thought process like, who's going to wake up as excited as me to talk about this brand? But the reality is that's a scarcity mindset. Like you have to trust people, the right people, of course. And I'm definitely open to ideas because I know now, especially this season of my life, like I don't know what I don't know, right?
Right. Yeah.
I've only done so much, I've only seen so much. So I welcome good ideas for sure. What about you?
Yes, I really work to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it can be challenging.
for sure. I agree with that. You talk a lot about decluttering, and how it facilitates like focus and happiness or boosts it.
For some people.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to dive in on that for a minute because the audience might be listening and say, what does that mean, decluttering?
Well, the reason I say for some people is because there are sort of certain categories when it comes to decluttering. So for me, outer order contributes to inner calm, and I always thought it's kind of disproportionate because I'm like, why is it that somebody said to me, I finally cleaned out my fridge and now I know I can switch careers, and I was like, man, I know what you mean, but why is that? It felt like you get too much of a boost. Like it gives people this sort of sense of energy and possibility that seemed completely out of proportion to like the effort required to clean off your desk or whatever. So I was always interested in that. But what I found when I started really getting into it is there are abundance lovers and there are simplicity lovers, and then there are people who are clutter blind. So simplicity lovers are people who want like bare surfaces and clean shelves, and they don't want much on the walls. They want a lot of space, a lot of spareness, a lot of room. Then there are abundance lovers, and abundance lovers love profusion and choice and buzz and stuff on the walls and a lot going on. A lot of times they like piles. Like they feel like that's what really stokes their creativity and gives them a sense of energy and kind of allows them to put their identity into their environment. And then there are the people who are clutter blind. And these are the people who just do not see it. Because the thing is, simplicities, even if you're an abundance lover, you don't want to be surrounded by stuff that doesn't work or that you don't want or that isn't suitable or that's just out of place. Like you might want a lot of stuff, but it's very carefully organized and it's just the way you want it. Whereas simplicity lovers are like, well, just get this out. I don't even want this stuff around. But clutter blind people, they just don't see it. They don't see that the cabinet's open. They don't see that the suitcase is sitting on the floor. It's still full of clothes from the trip you took 2 weeks ago. They don't see the mail on the counter piling up day after day. And it just doesn't bother them. And so I think you sort of have to know, because what happens is a lot of times people are telling everybody else they're wrong. So as a simplicity lover, I say to an abundance lover, gosh, don't you want to just clear out some space? You've got so much, like, let's get rid of this. Or I'm a boss saying, oh, look, a cluttered desk means a cluttered mind. And I'm trying to get everybody to have a clear desk. Whereas an abundance lover will say, oh my gosh, this feels sterile and stripped. And why have you gotten, why is everything out of sight? It's like, why put everything away in a filing cabinet? If you keep it out on your desk, it's so much easier to use. The clutter blind person is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, I don't care, whatever, and so if you're dealing with somebody who's clutter blind, or if you are clutter blind, you want to know that that's where you are, because these are all preferences. And so when we know where we fit, we're much better able to suit ourselves and also to communicate effectively with other people.
This is so funny and interesting to me because I'm getting a visual of me and my fiance.
Okay. Where are you and where is she?
So I'm more of like, do I dare say OCD? Everything is very neat and like clean. And she's more of like, stuff will be out a little bit. I realize like it's not that big of a deal, and I want her to be happy with certain stuff. But they're definitely, I'm on one side and she's definitely on the other with this.
Well, one thing that I think is often useful in that case is like, if you identify the things that are really important to you, because like, let's say you're a person who really doesn't like sort of kitchen mess. Like, it doesn't matter to you if magazines are out on the coffee table, or if there's mail on the front table, but you really don't like having dishes in the sink or something. Because I think sometimes because this is often a point of conflict with people, either in a home with sweethearts or family members, or at work, and you're in an open plan. If you sort of say like, this really bugs me, if you could meet me halfway on this, I would be a lot more comfortable in our environment. Because the question is, how do you create an environment where both people feel comfortable? And then she says to you, well, like, when I have projects that I'm working on, I need to spread out a little bit, and it would make my life a lot easier if you would just put up with me leaving stuff kind of out until I'm done. And if you're like, yeah, I can live with that, and talk it through. Because what I find is a lot of people try to convince each other that they're right and the other person's wrong. You'll feel much better if you just clean everything up. It'll just be much calmer. Won't that just be nicer? That's just the way it should be. Research shows that we're better off doing it this way. And it's like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care about that. So I don't care about doing it that way. And, but if it's just like, well, how do we meet in the middle?
Yeah.
It's easier.
Where are you on that? I'm just curious.
I like things orderly, but truth be told, I'm not super clean, which sounds kind of gross, but like, I'm the kind of person where like, I want everything put away, but like I wear shoes in the house, which some people find shocking.
Same. And my honest is like, can you take them off by the beginning or when you enter? I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, I like to wear shoes all the time. And some people, they're like, oh, you're just tracking dirt all in the house. I'm like, we've got a dog. I mean, like that dirt's coming in. But for some people, that's where I am. I want dishes in the sink, but I don't care if they stay there for a while before they make it into the dishwasher, where it sounds like maybe you're the kind of person that like wants everything to go straight into the dishwasher.
If I had my choice, yes.
Okay, right. Well, that's a preference. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you get a little bit older in life, like you realize like you got to pick and choose your battles, right?
That's very true. Yeah.
So, I could think of worse things. If that's my biggest problem with fiance, I think we're in good shape.
Right. But sometimes those little things though nag at people. So it is better I think it can be very useful to sort of really
communicate,
talk it through and really say, well, what matters to you? Or like, well, if you have your home office, like you can have that any way you want. And if you leave your stuff around the rest of the house or the apartment, I'll just put it in your office and shut the door. Like that works for some people too. It's like, I'm just going to dump it in there, or I'll have a box, and anything that's yours, I just put in this, basket and get it cleared out. I feel like I spent half my life putting dog toys back in the dog toy basket, but that's a very easy kind of clutter clearing to do.
Yeah. I love your content. I love the topics that you speak on. And again, you make somewhat complicated stuff so digestible. I was really excited to ask you about this one. I just came back from Chicago last week and I ran the marathon. I did well, like I ran the fastest I ever ran, but I know I could do better. And so I wanted to ask you what you mean exactly by expectations, inner and outer.
Okay. All right. So this is a frame. Yeah, I want to ask you what your tendency is. This will be fascinating. Okay. So when I was studying habits, like how the strategies we can use to make or break habits for my book, Better Than Before, I discovered this personality framework, which explains big patterns that you see in how people can and can't break habits, and also like a lot of other things about sort of human nature. And training for the marathon is a great example. So we all have inner expectations and outer expectations. So your outer expectations are a work deadline, or you have a contract to deliver some content. So that's an outer expectation. And then you have your inner expectation, which is your own desire to run the marathon, or your own desire to get back into meditation, or your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution. So depending on how we meet or resist outer and inner expectations, that makes us an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. And I'm going to explain this quickly for your listeners, and most people know what they are right away, but there is a quiz you can take online if you want to take a quiz. If you go to quiz.gretchenrubin.com, like 3.5 million people have taken this quiz.
And we're going to put that in the show notes. I think this is important.
Great. So it's free, it's very quick, and it will tell you which of these and give you sort of a little report. But as I say, most people know what they are right away. I can't wait to hear what your tendency is. Okay. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They meet the work deadline. They keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. So their motto is, discipline is my freedom. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they tend to customize. They tend to love research. If something makes sense to them, if it meets their inner standard, they will do it no problem. If it fails their inner standard, they will push back. So they don't like anything arbitrary or unjustified or irrational. So their motto is, I'll comply if you convince me why. Then there are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So these are people who say, I can keep my promises to other people. Why can't I keep my promises to myself? And so what an obliger needs is outer accountability. They need outer accountability even to meet an inner expectation. So if you want to work out, you might have to work with a trainer or work out with a friend who's going to be disappointed if you don't show up, or take your dog for a run, or raise money for a charity, or have an accountability partner. You have to have outer accountability even for an inner expectation. So their motto is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. And then finally is rebels. So rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do, anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they are very likely to resist. And typically they don't tell themselves what to do. Like they don't say, I'm going to take a woodworking class every Saturday at 10 a.m. because they think it's just going to annoy me that it's on the calendar and that somebody's expecting me to show up. So their motto is, you can't make me, and neither can I. So those are the 4 tendencies. And so knowing how you fit into the 4 tendencies gives you a lot of insight into how to set yourself up for success, or how to deal with someone else if you're trying to work with them in home or in life. But Craig, I have to ask you, do you know what your tendency is? Did it jump out at you, or do we need to do like a little probing to figure out what your tendency is?
Oh, it jumped out. I just want to say, first of all, this is awesome. Straight up, this is an awesome conversation. The first one, discipline is my freedom.
Upholder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me too. But you know what? So the biggest tendency for both men and women is obliger. The second biggest is questioner. Rebel is the smallest tendency, but our tendency, the upholder tendency, is only slightly larger. Upholders and rebels are kind of the extreme personality types, kind of on the fringes. And I think, I don't know about you, but I've always known that about myself. Like I have a pretty relentless personality. And I think, a lot of upholders, there's this kind of this discipline, which can come on pretty strong.
That's me.
Yeah.
And also, do you have an addictive personality?
That's a very interesting thing. I do not have an addictive personality. But there is kind of a relentlessness. Do you have an addictive personality?
I feel like both relentless and addictive. Like I just found running a couple years back, and 1 mile was enough. Like I had to run marathons.
Right.
Anything that,
that's sort of okay. So you mean in that way, sort of an intensity. In that way, absolutely, I do that. Like I went low carb. Like I quit eating sugar, and I eat almost no carbs. And I do that very easily because I'm just like, whoosh, I just let it go. So in that way, it's sort of addictive. But here's something interesting. when I was doing, I did I have my online quiz, but all you questioners out there are thinking about, well, what about selection bias? When you're talking about, how many obligers are there? Yes, questioners, I know all about selection bias. So I paid to have a representative sample of people take the quiz because I wanted to know the distribution. But just for fun, at the end of the quiz, I said, have you struggled with addiction? And I didn't say what addiction was. I didn't put any context on it. I was just curious to see what people would say. And the interesting thing was, and you could make an argument, and people have made the argument to me for why obligers might be more likely to struggle with addiction, why rebels might be more likely to struggle with addiction. But what I found was that questioners, rebels, and obligers were pretty much the same. But being an upholder seemed to give people some protection from struggling with addiction. Fewer upholders, some upholders did, but fewer upholders reported feeling like they struggled with addiction. And that makes sense to me too, because I think there is this kind of performance that's a part of an upholder. And so I could see to an upholder, like the idea of like, I'm going to lose control, and then tomorrow I'm going to be like really out of sorts. It's like, it's just not appealing to, so that made sense to me. But there is also that relentlessness, like you say, with doing something like training for the marathon. It's like, well, there's also a coldness. Do you have the coldness, which it's like, I got to do what I got to do. And I'm sorry if it's kind of inconvenient for you, but yeah, I got to, yeah.
Yeah. You know what? And also like, I don't really have a middle gear. It's like, I'm going 100 miles an hour, or I'm taking it out. There's nothing in between.
Right. Well, it's interesting with upholders that Facebook did a study several years ago, and they were, somebody was analyzing it, and they were sort of reporting with surprise that people who scored very high on conscientiousness were also scoring high on words like leisure and weekend. And I was like, well, that doesn't surprise me, because one of the things you see with upholders is they are often good at taking time off, because they'll be like, well, I need to take Saturday off, and I will just, and so I will. Or if I need to read for 2 hours on a weekend, I will. Whereas maybe an obliger would struggle with that more. Now, of course, that's why obligers are the rock of the world. I've had employers tell me that they only want to hire obligers, because obligers are the one that are like, well, look, if you really need me to help out, I will, if you need me, I'll show up. So that's, they have that superpower. But then maybe it's harder for them to say, okay, I'm not going to work on Saturday, even if my boss is emailing me.
I think this stuff is so interesting because a lot of people are the way they are, and I don't think they are aware that there's reasons as to why.
Yeah.
And maybe if they had some awareness, if they wanted to, they can facilitate some change, because they're aware. You can't change it if you can't see it. And you've really broken down like what makes someone a certain way.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. I think what's hard is that everybody assumes that people basically see the world the way they do. Like my next book is about the 5 senses. And even with something like, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? We think we're all living in the same world, and we 100% are not in the same world. We all live in our own world. But it's even the same thing with like, I want to run a marathon. How would I do that? How would I train for the marathon? It's sort of like, it's easy to say like, well, this worked for me, so it'll work for you. Or I struggle with this, and everybody struggles with this. Or like, why is it that women like us do this? And I'm like, maybe it's not all women. Maybe it's just you, maybe, like, I think sometimes we don't understand how we're alike and different from other people. And you're exactly right. When we don't know that, then we don't know what buttons to push if we want something to be different. So if I know someone's an obliger, I'm like, well, you need to create outer accountability. How are you going to do that? That's very different from like a rebel, where I'm like, well, for a rebel, you need to act out of choice or freedom. Like, where's your freedom in this? Like, once you articulate why this is what you choose, and this is what's going to give you that freedom that you seek, then it will be effortless for you. That's kind of the opposite of accountability, right? And so sometimes people give each other advice that's actually counterproductive. It's not even just useless, it's worse than useless, because they don't understand how we can all be different from each other.
I imagine you are the most effective leader, because you're able to identify why someone might be struggling and how they can get better results. For example, someone might not even know that they respond to outer accountability.
Yes.
They just think they're lazy or procrastinating. They don't realize if they just put their ego aside and realize, I need a trainer to go to the gym. And then they did that, and they worked their ass off, and they got in good shape. Like, like you're able to identify that. It's really powerful.
Well, it's funny because that's a great example because, you know, I often will hear something where like, okay, there's a married couple and, you know, married people, they want each other to be in shape. They want each other to be healthy. And so
Sure.
one person will be like, not exercising. Then finally, okay, I'm going to sign up with a trainer. I'm going to work out, or I'm going to take this class, you know, and I'm going to do it. And then they have great results. And then the spouse is like, hey, why are you paying for this trainer? You can just go on your own. Like, you don't like, why do you have to lock into this class? Like, just go whenever it's most convenient. And the person's like, oh, well, that makes sense. Like, I'm doing so well. Why am I paying for this? Or like, why am I locking myself into a certain kind of time of the day? So then they quit and they never go again, because it's an obliger and they needed that outer accountability. Whereas for someone else, it's like, oh yeah, that might be, you might actually exercise more when you can go whenever it's convenient. You do better when you do feel more free. And so, whenever I work with people, I always find out what their tendency is, because I communicate with people very, very differently, depending on what their tendency is.
You can, I imagine you can help somebody who's been like lost for so long, like trying to figure out why they are a certain way in 2 seconds to just get a grasp. Okay, this is where, meet them where they are, and then say, this is how I believe you could start to make progress.
Yes.
But people have to be open to it, right? They have to be like, you know what, you're right. I'm not going to work out by myself, right? Or I do question a lot of things and stuff like that.
Well, I think for a lot of people, it's sort of a relief, because like obligers are often like, well, I'm lazy. I have no discipline. I can't, why am I must have no self-esteem because I keep my promises to other people, but not to myself. I don't understand why I can never make myself a priority. So they're sort of hard on themselves. And then rebels often, some rebels really embrace being a rebel and love it. But then other rebels are sort of like, well, why can't I use a to-do list the way everybody else can? Why can't I sign up for a class the way everybody else can? Why is it that people are always like getting in my head, and the minute they tell me to do something, I don't want to do it, even if I want to do it? The minute they tell me to do it, I refuse to do it. Like, how, like, what's going on? And so when you say, hey, this is a very common thing. A lot of people are in the same situation as you. They've figured out all kinds of like clever workarounds. Everybody can get where they're going. They just like take a different road. And so I think for a lot of people, it's very exciting to be like, oh, there's a whole like toolbox of tools for people like me. And I don't have to waste my time trying out a bunch of things that fairly predictably are not going to work.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell a rebel, hey, sign up for a class. I'm not going to say to a rebel, you know, just put it on your calendar and you'll do it, because they're like, no, I won't, you know? So
now this is great stuff, but you have to be open to it 100%.
You have to be open to it. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned you quit sugar.
Yes.
What were some of the impacts from that?
Yeah, so I read Gary Taubes's book, Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. And I read it because my sister is a type 1 diabetic. So I really was just wanting to learn about insulin, you know, which is this incredibly important hormone in the body. So I read the book and I was completely convinced. I'm like now friends with Gary Taubes because he changed my life and the life of many other people that I know. And overnight, I just decided I'm going to just quit sugar, basically quit carbs. So just overnight. And I happened to be on a beach vacation with my in-laws, with my family. And so it was really easy because I just ordered we were ordering from the menu. So I just ordered different stuff from the menu, and immediately had amazing health effects. So I used to get just kind of bone shakingly hungry. Like in an instant, I would just be like shaking with hunger. And so my hunger moderated, which was just a huge pain. I had tremendous sugar cravings. I've always had the most intense sweet tooth. So it was so exciting for me to be free of my sweet tooth. I wasn't really aiming to lose weight, but I lost weight just kind of effortlessly. My blood work is amazing. You know, all the lipids, you know, all the stuff they check you for. And it's like rich, delicious, satisfying food. And so that was like 12 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah. So I eat, you know, I'll eat like blueberries sometimes. I eat nuts. I eat vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, which do have some carbs, but I don't eat things like
watermelon.
Flour. What?
You can't have watermelon?
I don't eat watermelon. No. I mean, I might have like a bite or two if somebody like served me a fruit salad, but I would not sit down with watermelon. No, very high sugar.
What about a banana?
No, wouldn't eat a banana.
Understood. I feel like you work out.
I do high intensity weight training.
Yeah.
So,
and
then like a lot of walking.
What does that consist of? High intensity weight training.
Twice a week, I do like a 20 to 30-minute workout, like at the outer limits of my strength. So, it's not very many repetitions, but I work to failure.
Nice. By
Yeah.
yourself or with a trainer?
With a trainer. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's very intense. So, and like I have had, like all of us, I've had some like trouble with my shoulders. So I have to be careful that I don't, overextend. So I want to have somebody making sure I don't do something terrible.
Understood. Better off that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that we're kind of talking about that's a good segue is habits.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the cool things that you talk about is the 21 strategies of habit changes.
Mm-hmm.
21 sounds like a big number.
Yeah.
Simplify this for us.
No, people will say to me, I don't want 21. Give me 3. Give me the 3 that work the best. But here's the thing, and we were talking about this earlier. We're all different. And so it's good to know all 21 because some work really well for some people and some don't work at all for other people. And some are available to us at some times in our lives, but they're not available to us at all times of our lives. So there are some that are pretty universal that I would say, yeah, just about everybody can use this strategy, like the strategy of convenience, right? Just about everyone is more likely to do something if it's more convenient. This is like the people who sleep in their gym clothes so they don't have to get changed in the morning. Or that and the paired strategy, which is the strategy of inconvenience, which is if you don't want yourself to do something, make it inconvenient. Like if you don't want to watch a lot of TV, put the remote control on a high shelf in another room so that you got to make a big effort to go over and get the remote control. You can't just flip it on as you walk through the room. Those work for just about everybody. But then there are strategies that don't work for everybody, but they might work really well for you. So you want to kind of know all of your choices so that you can pick and choose. And then with a really important habit, you might use many strategies to try to help you keep that habit, which is a lot easier than it sounds. Yeah. So I wanted to identify everything people could use.
But essentially, anybody that has an unproductive habit, they could change it.
That gets you in okay, so addiction is, I don't talk about addiction. So if we put addiction to the side and we take sort of behaviors like OCD or something like that.
Procrastination, stuff like that.
Well, no, procrastination I would consider a habit, but anything that sort of is in the realm of you need to go see a specialist. I don't want to speak to that. I don't want to, I don't want to outkick my coverage.
Understood.
But for the basic habits, things like getting enough sleep, exercising, eating more healthfully, making consistent progress on a creative project or trying to start a side hustle, stopping procrastination, those kinds of habits. Yeah, I think the 21 strategies can help. That some combination of strategies would help just about everybody.
Yeah, and why I think this conversation is so important for so many reasons. There's so many people that aren't exactly happy where they are, or they thought they might be somewhere else at this point. You can reinvent yourself. You can change a lot of the ways that you show up, even just by little things like changing some of the habits like Gretchen's talking about. And I highly suggest everybody go do that quiz and so forth and just become familiar with maybe why you're operating in a certain way or a certain frequency, and then being available to make some productive changes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think sometimes people think a change is going to happen to them. And it almost never does.
You have to create it. You have to take
You have
action.
to create it. Yeah, you really do. You have to decide that you want to change.
Yeah.
But it's like that old joke, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change.
It's so true. But
you gotta be the light bulb that wants to change.
That's so rich, right? And also a lot of companies will bring me in to speak to them and so forth. And it's in this example, one coach can tell the players one thing, right? Or a CEO could tell their employees one thing 100 times, but then I'll come in, or you, just a fresh person, and say the same thing, but maybe just a little bit differently. And all of a sudden they're available to hear it.
Right.
Because maybe it was somebody different, but the other people had to be available to hear it.
Well, that sort of puts me in mind of 2 points. One is when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So I think sometimes it's the readiness is all, and that a person is sort of ready to hear something. And if you're the person who walks by and says it, you sort of get the credit. But it's really the student was ready. And I've certainly experienced that in my own life where all of a sudden it's I see the way. And I also think that you're right, that sometimes a different vocabulary really is very meaningful. And when I started all this, I was like, well, what difference does vocabulary make? I mean,
You
it's
have the
just like,
best vocabulary I've ever heard in my life.
oh, well, thank you. It's just, it's just language games, but it actually really is significant. Like, what is your metaphor? So like some people love the metaphor of the journey. And when I wrote the book, The Happiness Project, many people said, oh, you can't have that be your title because the word project is so off-putting. Nobody wants to do a project. That sounds like homework. And I'm like, I love a project. The Happiness Project sounds like what could be more fun than a happiness project, but I don't like a journey. But then, and then like, do you practice piano or play piano? I mean, there are all these ways where our language goes. Do you have to do something or do you get to do something? A lot of times
That's a
when
big one.
and so if you have, like, if you come in and you're talking about maybe familiar ideas, but you have a very fresh framework and you're using a vocabulary that it kind of is illuminating in a different way, well, then somebody who couldn't hear it the other way, to you, they're kind of tuned into your frequency. And so then you're just the more effective communicator.
Yeah, this is great stuff. Just a couple final nuggets and we'll wrap up. I was looking at your content earlier. Number one, doing homework for this interview was such a treat because I'm a fan anyway.
Wow.
But your content, and for the audience listening, you should all check out specifically amongst the other things, Gretchen's Instagram. She puts on some really cool quotes. And one thing I saw you write is this, and it hit home for me. Happiness is a critical factor for work, and work is a critical factor for happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we spend so much time at work. It's if you're not happy at work, it's hard to be happy. So yeah, I think it's,
I know that from experience.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, you made a big change, right? So,
Change.
okay, so this is one of the things that I think is interesting. So some people say, they argue that happiness has a set point and that people might go up, they might go down, but they're always basically at the same place. But actually, circumstances play a role. And I think a great thing is like, you were the same person when you had your old job, you're the same person when you have your new job, but you're happier now. And so sometimes, yeah, it's true that like 50% of happiness is genetically determined, but there's a significant percentage that we can affect with our conscious thoughts and actions. And one of the most important things we choose to do is how we work.
Yeah. And also like, I'm curious what you take on this. Like everybody has gifts and you want to find like what you're in alignment to, right? Like, and when you're in like flow or you finally find like what feels natural, like what sets your soul on fire, there is that separates kind of the rest of the stuff. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Like, so I started out as a lawyer,
Yep.
and I didn't leave law because I didn't like law. I really just felt compelled to become a writer. I mean, and in a way that's very exciting and it's very gratifying, but it's almost a little bit out of your control. Like I would do it even if nobody paid me and nobody read what I wrote. Like I just have to do it. It's kind of like, when the Death Star puts the Millennium Falcon in the tractor beam and they're just like, we're going in, we can't resist. It's like the gravitational pull is too strong. And I think for some people it is true. It's like that. And then for other people, they don't have that strong sense of a call. And so they have to figure it out. And, but then they maybe have more choices too, because if you've got that strong call, you're sort of like, there's only really one thing I want to do. So I got to make that work.
What a cool perspective. And I never thought about it. I feel so blessed that I finally found it after 35 years. But also for the people that haven't necessarily identified it, they have more options.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because there's sort of many things maybe that they would enjoy doing, because just doing work well is very satisfying. I think that's one of the nicest parts of human nature is that we're very gratified by doing work worth doing and doing well.
I used to hear back in the day, if you find what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And when I was in the rat race in Wall Street, like I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I don't buy that. Like it's always going to be a job and then everything else. Right. But now, I mean, this isn't work to me. Like I love this stuff. Like people always, what are you on? I'm like, you don't understand. Like my soul is lit.
Right.
I love, these are my dinner conversations. Like I genuinely love this stuff. And for the audience listening, like if you're not happy, right, or it doesn't feel like you're in alignment, you do have choices, or at least journal, whiteboard, see what else it interests you, or maybe what you're good at. I hope that everybody finds something that gets them out of bed in the morning excited.
Right. One thing that's really helpful to say is think back on your past. This works for habit change too. Like if you're like, was there ever a time in your past where this habit came easily to you? Because often that has clues. Or like, was there a time in your past where you felt like particularly happy or engaged? Because often like we don't really understand what's happening to us at the time. Then in reflection, you're like, oh, well, you know, in that job, I was giving a lot of presentations. I was like standing up in front of people and presenting. And I didn't really realize how much I enjoyed that. Like, turns out I like to perform. And in my new job, I'm not performing. And so it feels kind of flat. And so sometimes it's easier when you think back on your past, or like, wow, that job I really did not like. What was it specifically? Was it that I had a bad boss? Was it that I was doing things that I wasn't good at? Was it things that I was good at, but that I didn't enjoy? Like, the more clarity we have about, and that's just our most rich source of data, is our own previous experience. And I think sometimes we don't reflect on it enough. We just move forward and don't think about, well, what were the lessons that I could have gleaned from what I've already done?
Such a good point. So valuable. This is awesome. I wanted to ask you this because you made some really cool references earlier this comment. I just sense a lot of alignment synergy. You mentioned Star Wars. Are you a Game of Thrones fan?
Oh, huge. We can do the are you a Game of Thrones fan? We can do the tendencies of Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is all the tendencies.
So what I had a feeling that you were, and I wanted to ask you, are you watching House of Dragon?
Okay. I watched the first 5 episodes and then I kind of like, I mean, I didn't say, oh, I'm not going to watch it, but I haven't watched it. So
Really?
yeah. What about you? Do I need to get back into it? Because
I'm really into it. Did you see the time jump or not yet?
That's the one where I think I need to watch the time jump, and then maybe I'll re-engage. Yeah. It was the one where like all the mischief happened at the wedding. You don't want to be at a Game of Thrones wedding. Stay home for the weddings. Okay, well, I'll try it again. Yeah, I've been meaning to. As I said, I just
it's good, Gretchen. It reminds me right now, like with all the politicking and the personalities, it reminds me of Game of Thrones when it was in its prime.
Okay, good. Well, you can't, no higher praise than that.
Yeah, when Game of Thrones was at its best, forget what a treat, right?
Yeah. Well, and it was funny for me because I would see the 4 tendencies, like upholders, so we're upholders. So Brienne of Tarth, Stannis, his last words to Brienne are "do your duty," such an upholder thing to say. Tywin, right? Okay. Then rebels, Arya and Cersei, and the Tywin actually says to Arya, "You remind me of my daughter." Jaime is an obliger. Jon Snow is an obliger. Daenerys Targaryen is an obliger. And usually when rebels pair up, I mean, yeah, when rebels pair up, they pair up with an obliger, whether that's like a work team or in romance. Yes. So there's Cersei, the rebel, with her brother lover, Jaime, the obliger. So you see that happening.
Yeah.
Tyrion is a questioner. He's the only one walking around being like, isn't there a better way? Like, how can we run this government better? Like, he's asking why. Yeah, so it's so fun to see them. Yeah.
That's awesome. I had a feeling.
Yeah.
And now that, like, to be honest with you, I've learned a lot in this conversation. Now looking back at some cool content like that, like you kind of look at it a bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what's so fun about something like Game of Thrones. It's like, you feel like there's a lot to discover.
100%. Yeah. This is something that I always say. I worded it a little differently, but you said it, and I want to hit it home for the audience. Now is always the best time to begin.
Yes.
How important is that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's funny because every other week I do like a bonus episode for Happier with Gretchen Rubin, and the tagline for that is, the best time to start a happiness project is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Now is all we got. Now is all we got.
It's so true. And like living with a sense of urgency, right? And like realizing like one of the reasons I made the big shift is the pandemic was like, life is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't know what tomorrow, forget about like souls and spirit, like this human experience. Like we don't know how long we got. Like we got to make every second count. And there's so many people out there that have an idea, but they don't act on it. And they go back to their dead end job, or they live with regret. Like all you really need is 20 seconds of courage. Just take a step. Right. And then sometimes doors begin to open, opportunities begin to present itself, but you'll never know unless you do something now when you feel, and it's never going to shout at you. I think Oprah said, like, sometimes it's just a whisper, right? But you got to raise the volume on that.
Yeah, it's so true. So true.
Yeah, this was unbelievable. Hang out for 1 second. I want to connect with you. Gretchen, I want to ask you, the audience is growing rapidly. We have over 3 million now. What's the best way for the community and the audience to support you?
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking. We'll take the quiz because I'm so delighted when people email me or like, say, talk to me on social media with their insights and observations about that. So that's quiz.gretchenrubin.com. Listen to the podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin. If you're interested, or if you like to read a book, I've got a book about the 4 tendencies. And then we talked a lot about the strategies for habit change. That's my book, Better Than Before. So, an audience supports me by allowing me to support them by sharing my ideas. So and I'm all over social media. So, the podcast is on YouTube. It's all in all the places. So look me up, hit me up with your insights and observations and questions. I love to connect with the audience. I feel like the audience is my research. The world is my research assistant. I feel so lucky.
I just came up with a really good idea, and I do this sometimes with some of the other guests. For whoever takes a screenshot or posts something of their favorite takeaway from this episode, post it on Instagram, tag me and Gretchen, and the best takeaway, Gretchen will send a signed copy of one of her books to.
To every person who does that?
No, just one. The best.
Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be fun.
We don't need you sending 3 million books.
Yeah. No, I was just like, how many do I have? I just did a big mailing. I'm like, I think I'm running low. No, that's a very fun idea. And it's always fun to see what people take away too, because it's not always, it's funny how sometimes, like, I'm sure you see this a lot. It's like, it's some offhand comment. It's like, is a huge revelation to somebody. And then something that you're like, oh, this is like my big point. And people are like, yeah, I've heard that before, whatever. So it is really interesting to see what lands with people.
I agree 100%. This was great. Gretchen, I want you to know you're the definition of perspective, wisdom, and growth, from taking your life experience to spreading positivity, light, and deep truths. You're a true visionary, role model, and beacon of hope for anybody coming up today with big goals and aspirations. I could personally guarantee your best is yet to come. Keep on spreading your wings and leaving your mark on this world. So much love and respect for you. Thank you so much for stopping by and dropping these priceless nuggets today.
Well, thank you, Craig. I so enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we could talk all day long. We're interested in all the same subjects. So I so appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
That was too much fun.
So fun. Thank you.
My pleasure. How else can I support you, Gretchen?
This is great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, let's stay connected, and we're both here in Manhattan.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah. I know I keep wishing somebody would organize some like podcast meetup, but nobody's done that.
We should. And what kind of guests do you have on your podcast?
We don't have that many guests. We don't have an interview format. We have guests from time to time. But we don't have, do you have a guest every episode or just some episodes?
So I just started doing a second one every week, a solo episode. And ironically enough, like, they have more downloads than some of the ones with the huge celebrities. So I think it's good for just people to get a little bit more insight, and those are personal. And I know you have them too, the shorter ones.
Yeah.
They're very impactful.
Yeah. Are you with the network? I can't remember.